going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'm going to declare a quorum currently of 6 trustees present. Item C, public comment. Do we have any cards? With no cards, we'll move to D1 of our workshop session, consideration and discussion related to updates regarding the strategic design process. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent and board members. As everyone is aware, we are probably about halfway through our strategic design process. Ms. Cammie Green is here from Engage to Learn, and Cammie's going to give the board kind of an update on where we are in that process. 3 days in, I believe we've completed 2 of 4 phases, but I'm going to leave the details to Mrs. Green. Cammie, thank you for joining us this evening. Look forward to you bringing us up to speed on our work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to give y'all an update tonight on our design and our engage phases that are complete at this point. So this is the overall strategic design model. And as you can see, we completed the engage phase, which was the community engagement in February and March. And then we have completed the design phase the end of March and then part of April. And so at this point, we have gone through the goals, and we will actually be spending a little bit of time finalizing those goals as we go into the create phase. So on April 29th and 30th, we will start create. That'll get more into the specific results and measurables of the goals. We will also design the learning innovation framework. And then we will go into June and May, and we will do lead with the CBA dashboard and life protocols.
I am so sorry. I have no idea what that was.
We're still teaching him how to use it.
Someone's found me.
So just
Someone found me, though.
You can tell I have children at home because I learned to just ignore all the noises that they make and keep moving on.
I think, Mr. Nugent, she just equated you to.
I absolutely heard that. I absolutely heard that. Fortunately, these guys are used to fighting through me. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. This is just a different view of all of the design team dates that we have completed and that are coming up with each of the products and the deliverables for each of those dates. And so the design team will meet together through May the 20th. And then starting on June the 2nd, that will be an internal team only, where we will bring in some more of the CNI staff, principals, more teachers and instructional coaches to really help get into the writing of the protocols for the Learning Innovation Framework. And then June the 8th will be a leadership training for all the principals, and they will have an opportunity to review the strategic design framework and look at the goals and the action steps that have been created by that design team, and then really determine what is implementation for this actually look at my campus, since we know that every campus has some individual needs, and they'll have some autonomy for how that is going to be carried out on their campuses. So just quick with the engage phase, we kicked it off with our summits and having our student panel, and just really enjoyed the opportunity to hear from students and what their highest hopes are for their time in school. We had a total of 1,663 community members, students, staff, parents that participated in the online survey. And then we had 172 participants that participated in the summit. And we probably actually had a little bit more than this because some of them were working in teams and groups during the summits, both in person and for the virtual one. And then we had 87 participants that were part of our focus groups. So all of that community engagement data, we created the engagement report that is posted on your College Station ISD website, and the design team has been using that data. So the first components was the core beliefs that Dr. Dawson Orr came and facilitated with the board back in March. And then the design team's first deliverable was they looked at the Highest Hopes data to create the new vision for College Station ISD, along with incorporating the current mission that you have in place. Molly actually shared this quote with me, and I loved it so much because I really feel like that this encompasses kind of where College Station ISD is in the strategic design process. So success is when our reality catches up to our imagination. And so, you're really dreaming big, coming up with these highest hopes for your students in your vision. And now is really the point in the process where we're actually going to put in the action steps to make really what that imagination, those aspirations, those highest hopes become a reality. So the learner outcomes were designed during the design phase, and this is really talking about, valuing. What do you value, for learners, and it's about what you value, the learner outcomes. So during this point, we didn't decide like how are you going to measure these learner outcomes. It was just what are you going to measure, and so the learner outcomes were developed. And then the design team created from that the portrait of a learner. So what are the skills that we want learners to be acquiring on a daily basis? From there, they designed the portrait of a teacher and the skills that we want teachers in College Station ISD to be acquiring and to possess. And then developed the portrait of a leader during that time as well. These are just a few photos of the design days. I will say that the leadership team did a fabulous job of bringing together various members from the community to comprise the design team. There's about 40 members of parents, business owners, students, teachers, and campus and district administrators. And the process uses design thinking. So it's a messy process. So board members that have been involved in that, you can definitely attest to that for sure. And we just really appreciate the trust that you have in the process and the trust that you have in the facilitators to ultimately get you to the outcome of the strategic design framework. And so the last deliverable that we ended with on the design days was really coming to agreement on the goal categories. And so there were 6 goal categories that you can see up here. The design team is basically going to take these goal categories. They've been working on goals already, and they're going to finalize those as we go into the Create days. And so these goals are really, aspirational goals that you have here in College Station ISD, really based on the data. So a whole SWOT analysis went into creating these goals, looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats associated for the district. So now that all that is complete, what is next? I've given you a high-level overview of what is next. And just to really share with you, now that we've gone through the design phase, we're really going to bridge into taking all the work and making it actionable as we go into the create phase. So just broad definition of the goals up here, that they're bold resolutions. And where we're going to take from those goals when we go into create is the team is going to create specific results. So those are going to be checkpoints that are going to allow you to know if you're making progress to the goals. And those specific results are going to be timelined out over the next 1 to 5 years. And then from the specific results, the design team is going to create action plans for the year 1 specific results. And that's really when the measurables are going to come into place. So how are you going to measure, these goals that you have in place? This is just an example of a goal category, positive culture, and then the goal that was established, and then you can see the specific results. And all of our specific results start with a verb. They're really getting into the action that is going to be taken. The other piece that will happen on the Create Days is creating the Learning Innovation Framework. And With the Learning Innovation Framework, this is one way that you're going to ensure that those learner outcomes are reached. And we're going to be using the Portrait of the Learner skills that have already been designed to really use a backwards design process to create that Learning Innovation Framework. And so just next steps, again, I shared the dates that we had already completed. So these are all the dates that are upcoming. And we will end the process with the board workshop on June the 14th, where we will share the final strategic plan. So a lot of information I shared. Do you have any questions about the work that has been complete up to this point, or where we are going next?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that the feedback that I have received, having not, since I'm not there, that it is overwhelmingly positive, and especially with the leadership and the and how y'all are facilitating the process. There's the word on the street is very good for Engage to Learn. So thank y'all very much for facilitating us and leading us through this process so far.
Well, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it.
I can't not say something. I don't have a question, but just want to let you guys know, and ditto what Mr. Nugent just said, being part of it. I feel weird having my back to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the leadership from Engage to Learn. It has been difficult and messy, but you guys have done a great job helping us focus, and then also adjusting, whenever we've had questions or we've struggled a little bit. So it's been a really fun process for me, and I've loved all of it. It's exhausting and invigorating and exciting all at the same time. And one of my favorite things, though, you guys, is just being in that room with, almost 40 other people that are as excited about education as I am, and having the opportunity to work with all different kinds of people and deepening those relationships, with those people as well. Some people that I've known for a long time but didn't really know, right? So it's been a really cool experience, and I look forward to everything that we have coming up.
I just have a quick question about the implementation process. Could you talk about that a little bit more once everything is finalized and decided upon? I mean, I think I saw some dates, but could you talk a little bit more about the implementation?
Sure. So really that June 8th day will be the day that we're really going to be working on implementation and what that looks like at each of the campuses. And so, that's going to depend on what those action steps, right, are for year one, and what needs to be carried out during the next school year. And so we will use our protocols and processes to help them take those action plans and determine what implementation is going to look like on each of their campuses.
Have we developed, or maybe this is something we need to talk about, like a communication plan of how this is going to be rolled out to the community and the rest of the staff beyond the principals? And
yeah, so that's something that we work on during our project management. So Molly and Tiffany and I have standing meetings, and Mike joins our standing meetings about once a month as well. And then I know that Chuck has really been involved anytime that there's a communication piece that we need to bring in. And so that's something we'll be discussing on our standing meetings. And Molly or Chuck, I don't know if there's anything y'all want to add to that. Yeah.
okay, great.
The collective administrative team on June the 8th, those that aren't already engaged in some form will be brought up to speed on the plan, because then they're going to translate that, and you're going to see the actionable steps as is applied really more specifically to their campus plan.
Right.
So that is, we're taking a whole day of our summer administrative leadership institute retreat and spending on that. I think following that, as we move into July, and in particular August, then we'll formulate some formal communication out to everyone. My intent as walking or leading up to the rally that we typically have, our convocation, was that this product will be a cornerstone for the message that I delivered to the district. So that is the rough plan at this point in time, Amanda.
Great, thank you.
I just have kind of a process question. Could you go back to the slide where you had examples of parts of the plan? Oh, right, nope, just passed it up. There we go. So when you've got the goal category and you've got the goal with specific results, I guess I'm missing how that result equals the goal. I mean, that's a plan, that's a process to potentially reach the goal, but how do we measure whether the goal has been reached or is going to be reached or is in the process of being reached?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these goals are really, kind of 3 to 5 year goals. And the specific results that you see up there, they would be timelined out. So for example, you might say that the 3.1 specific result up there, that's something that you want to accomplish in year 1. And so that would be put in 21, 22. And so then if that is a year 1 specific result, then the design team is going to create an action plan for that. And the action plan is going to have the measurables attached to it. Whereas the next one, it should be 3.2, so that's a typo. Implement a character development plan, you might say that that's going to be a year 2 specific result. So you wouldn't work on the action plan and measurables for that until the following year.
Mm-hmm. But I guess, how do we measure, once we've implemented the character development plan, for instance, whether that is causing us to reach the goal?
Yeah, so all your specific results collectively are what you're going to need to do in order to reach the goal, but the measurables tied to that, whatever you choose to measure it with, that's what's going to tell you if you're accomplishing it or not.
Okay.
Can I clarify that? Is it tied to the specific result, or you said tied to it? Tied to which one?
Yeah, so the action plans are tied to the specific results
Right.
that are directly aligned to the goals.
But where's the measurement actually come in on those 3? Or, where does the measurement come in on?
It comes in on the action
Action
plans
plan.
that I don't have listed up here yet. So once we get through the create phase and provide an update on that, then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the action plans. But that's a great question. It's not up there.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
Thanks, Josh.
In our call, I guess last week, because I'm a linear guy, in case anybody didn't know that already. So this has been interesting for me, but something I was asking Kimmy last week was much like you're talking about, Josh. Where's the measurable? Where is the value to determine if we're accomplishing this or not? And it will be articulated in the action plan associated with the specific result. And I think what took me a while as I was having a conversation with Cammie was just becoming familiar our terminology and syncing up our terminology in our conversation. Because I'm like, okay, so how do I know that, we've accomplished this or not? And so I was very much along the line of action plan. And so I had to slow myself down to understand the process and know that that's coming. Yes.
Yeah, great question.
A few comments, and one on that specifically. I think there is a little bit of faith then that we have the right action plans aligned with the right specific results so that measuring those will result in our overall goal. And more than faith, that we choose and come up with the right action plans, obviously. And then there are some places, I think, where we'll be directly able to measure the goal even at that higher level, some of them. Anyway, overall comments, though, for those of you, I mean, that haven't been able to be in those room for the 3 days, similar to what Geraldine was saying, it has really been a fun experience, an exciting experience. It's been sometimes a stressful experience. It's been fast-paced, but it's overall very rewarding to be in that room with the people and just talking for 3 full days about how we can make education in College Station even better, right? And what's important to us. And that's really what the whole time has been focused on. And that really is exciting. So lots of exciting discussions. You saw the goal categories. It was really interesting to see that, those came to be out of 8 different groups, kind of had to each come up with their own top goals. And there was just this amazing amount of alignment between those 8 teams that this is really what we thought we should focus on.
And I'll just note that, and all of that came from the surveys and from the feedback that we got from the community. We're always looking at that and taking that into consideration. So those came directly from that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Survey and data as well. So the next step is to kind of summarize what are the actual goals, specific goals for these, and then get down to those, my terminology, right, specific results. And I hope we are, I think we have good categories. I hope we are bold with our goals. I really, could we use that word bold, but I hope we are bold. So.
Appreciate that feedback as well, and just the commitment. It's a huge commitment for all the design team members, and just really appreciate how every member of that design team is digging in and giving up, their own time to be a part of this process.
Anything else?
Cami, thank you. It is challenging at times, but it's very rewarding. We are fortunate to be at a place and time, I think, in our district to be able to have these types of conversations. The fact that we made this a priority, I think, will absolutely position us to really move things to the next level of expectation in our district. So we're talking about the right things, and we're having the right conversations as a school district. And thank y'all for leading us through this process.
Well, appreciate the opportunity to be with you here tonight, and please continue to ask questions as we go throughout the process, if there's anything you need clarification on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, that takes us to item 2, D2, consideration and discussion related to policy EI local, related to partial credit earned for courses. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent, and board members. Ms. Parkerson, our Executive Director of Secondary Ed, is going to share some information with us related to policy EI local. And as the agenda says, it's pertaining to partial credit. There has been some information in transmittal in the last several weeks, but Tiffany's going to take some time to kind of walk through the specifics of what the policy states now and the suggested language change that we're proposing. This is a discussion item only. There's no particular action we're seeking this evening, so it's really a first reading. So, Ms. Parkerson?
Good evening, Mr. Martindale, Mr. Nugent, members of the board. I'm excited to be here tonight to provide, hopefully, some clarity to a very complicated piece of policy. So I'm going to begin with where this conversation started amongst counselors and administrators to give you the context of how we've landed here with this proposed revision. So in fall counseling meetings and principal meetings, there was a lot of discussion about the pupil progression plan, especially as how it played out in impacting students. So under the pupil progression plan, for example, a student might have a 60 in the first semester, that same student could then make an 80, and in that circumstance in particular, then we would look at a year-long course credit from the year-long lens view, but only in that context of only the spring semester being able to save the fall semester but never in context of someone who is, who did very well in the fall semester, did not do as well in the spring semester, and those 2 semesters averaging together. And so that led us to having a lot of conversations about why and what is best for kids, especially in light of being in the midst of the pandemic, which then led Chrissy Hester into doing some more research with our policy council on what other school districts have for their EI local policies. And so what you see in the red line copy really reflects that consultation and that research of what do we need to do as a school district to get us to a point where we can view the year-long credit piece. So you'll see that it changes that pupil progression plan heading to partial credit only, and makes it more succinct in focusing on when the district would award only a partial credit. So in this instance, for a semester that is below a 70, you would give them semester credit for only the other semester that they passed, which really, I gave that example of the current practice of, right now, the spring can save the fall, but the fall and the spring are never looked at together, which gets us into this proposed change. The actual implementation of the policy would then be different. It would give us, at the administrative level, the ability to view the year-long course. This policy, EI local, the verbiage that you are looking at here of indicating partial credit would then align us with a lot of comparable school districts. Every time I've looked up this policy, this is what it says in comparable school districts, clarifying that we want to be able to award partial credit in this way. And then in the administrative procedures side of things, we would then be able to take a look at it across a year-long course and average semesters to the benefit of a student, regardless of which semester that student failed. So if you, I hate to read from a slide, but really looking at that implementation piece is where the true change comes in. If the combined scores are equal to 70 or above, a credit will be given to both semesters, and we would be able to then combine those. So we've had, like I said, this conversation started back in the fall out of the counseling group. We talked about this in the high school principals groups, brought it to the middle school principal conversation, really delved into this at our grading guidelines meetings that we had in really talking about what we wanted this to look like. And Chrissy did all the legwork on what policy changes would need to happen for us to be able to do that. So a lot of words to make that clear as mud. What questions do you have?
Will you go back to the policy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me see if I say this correctly, Ms. Parkerson.
Yes.
As current, and this is why it's called pupil progression right now, as opposed to partial credit. As current, you use the example of 60 in the fall, 80 in the spring. If that occurred with a student now and the combined average was 70, they'd be awarded credit for that course.
Yes.
For the year, right? If that happened in reverse order under current policy, an 80 and then a 60 in the spring, and it averaged to 70, but due to pupil progression policy, local EI, because the spring is less than the 70, then the student would only receive credit for the first semester,
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
All right. And so what we in essence are proposing is that regardless of each individual semester, if they average to a 70, the student receives credit for the year.
Yes. And so when you look at the change in verbiage toward partial credit, it's almost that the policy needs to say the opposite of the intended action on it, that the focus is in on giving only half of a year rather than having verbiage that really expresses that we would average the two together. Is that?
And this is how TASB Policy Council proposes the wording?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
As far as the policy, the fact that we've removed the language regarding high school students, is that an issue? Is that a concern? What was the rationale for that?
So we only award credit for high school courses, and sometimes those high school courses are actually taken in middle school. So I think it's, the word credit itself covers the fact that it would be only for high school credit type courses, because
Okay,
nothing else
so,
is
but it
given a
would-
credit.
But it would still cover if
Yes.
they're eighth grade, okay. Gotcha.
Yes, if they're taking a course for high school credit, it would cover them.
Okay.
Actually, the way this is written, current, wouldn't necessarily capture middle school students.
So to simplify it, like really simplify it, it's just basically taking the best of everything for the kids, for the students to give them, I mean, if they've earned a passing grade overall.
Yes.
I mean, it's just combining the best possible.
Being able to look at it from, if it's a
Right.
year-long course, being able to take that year-long view,
Right.
looking at the average of both semesters, giving us the ability to do so.
Makes sense to me.
What was the rationale for how it was before, that the spring, you know, we had to pass the spring?
I think that the original intent, having not been part of those conversations, but reading between the lines with the title of pupil progression plan, is that it would award students who are still showing forward growth, even though they weren't as successful in the first semester. However, it was very limiting. You know, from that broader view as well, you know, and this is a spin-off conversation from our larger conversations that y'all are aware of just really looking at our systems and our practices and making sure that they align with our current world and what is best in serving all kids. And so I think that, you know, the time and place and the context, that this is the right time to be reexamining this and looking at it from a different perspective.
I mean, I guess I could see the rationale. Yeah, if you end up I mean, maybe you made a 90 in the fall, but if you have a 50 in the, or whatever, 55 in the spring, you know, not progressing that child. But y'all are the experts on this, so I will trust your recommendation.
You know, and I will say we have great discussions with the principal groups at middle and high school, and we had that same debate of what if you did have that student who had the 95 and the counterpoint, you know, and the conversation around that really delved into, then probably that individual student is the exception, not the rule, right? Not the reason. And probably something catastrophic is happening in his or her life that is affecting their academic performance, and we need to look at them holistically and their progress across the year as well. So I just wanted you to know we did have those same types of discussions.
I figured, yeah. I have one bigger picture question if y'all are done, but just this, it seems like recently we've had more things come out of policy and go into procedure. Is that true? Or is it, and kind of what's the philosophy of what has to be in policy and what can just be in more a procedure? I don't know if that's.
Well, in this particular procedure is the execution of policy, obviously. So to be able to award the credit in the manner that Tiffany's speaking of and capture that in procedure, we can't apply any procedure that doesn't adhere to current policy. So I think we're having lots of conversation, I know at the administrative level, in looking at policy and implications of it, because certain policies have been a certain way for a long time. And I think with the addition of Tiffany's position, that we have someone that whose role is to really look at these things. We have someone whose purpose is to really review these things and make recommendations. And there are things that have been there for a long time, and we've probably had lots of conversation about. I remember this conversation as a principal at college when I was at College Station High School. But having someone to have the time to really look at the policy and recommended a change, was a different story. So I'm trying to think of other things you may be referencing, Ms. McAdams, but anything along the procedural lines, or the implementation of whatever adjustments we make with policy. And I think on this one in particular, I can kind of get where it was before, but I think that was a different day and time. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is what's best for our students. So that is really, in essence, as Tiffany was speaking to me about this, is the question I asked myself: what is best for our students? What practice? And I think this recommended change is best for our students.
Well,
Yes, sir.
yeah, Ms. Parkerson, I've really enjoyed watching the evolution of this as it's gone along. But could I get you to go back a
Yes.
couple slides again?
Yes, sir.
And I think the implementation of the proposed policy changes is very clear. But if we go back to the policy, the language that we struck.
The red line copy?
Yes,
sir.
yes. I mean,
Head that way.
that was very specific. Is the fact that we're not, and the blue, what's left is very specific as well. But when we're talking about different semesters and things like that, is there going to be any question about that, or does that need to be written in there? Does that make sense?
That is a great question, and I will own that I'm the new person to this type of conversation, and so I will share my understanding. So, based on Mrs. Hester's consultation with the Policy Council, this is the path to getting us to that end result is making this policy change, which is not as specific as the pupil progression plan verbiage was. Absolutely.
Okay.
And so I think that's why this needs so much discussion and whatnot, because the path to get us to where we would like to go is a roundabout, not necessarily a direct one. And they did not recommend us having that level of specificity in the policy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else? All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So we'll have follow-up, in transmittal as we have.
Yes.
And if you have any questions on this as we move forward toward the May meeting, please reach out so we can have additional conversation or fill whatever particular questions you guys may have. One more point. This really is rooted, and this recommended change, it comes out of conversations with our campus staff, correct? Counselors, our principals, and they're in full support of this suggested change.
Yes, we've had, like I said, multiple conversations, and it was integrated in our grading guidelines discussion, and all of the middle school principals as well as the comprehensive high school principals discussed it with their leadership teams and gave the stamp of approval as well. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you so much. All right, that takes us to item D3, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2021-22 budget development. Mr. Martineau.
Here with the latest update on budget development for 21-22 is our CFO, Amy Draws. And I know Amy's going to give us just some preliminary revenue projections and then what to expect in the upcoming months as far as how budget development will evolve. Ms. Strauss?
Thank you, Mr. Martindale. I appreciate it. So first of all, just a brief overview of the budget objectives and the plan that we presented to you at least a month ago, maybe a little longer. But the budget objectives remain that we have House Bill 3 in place right now. We do not know exactly what our funding formula will be. And so our objective is to recruit and retain a high-quality workforce to support instruction, to support that quality instruction in the way of staffing, supplies, equipment, and services, and to maintain a financially healthy fund balance. And with that, we're still in phase 1 of our budget goals, which will take us through to the legislative session ending on or about the end of May. But we're continually evaluating our current budget, but we are focusing more on staffing and salaries because that is 85% or somewhere between 80 and 85% of our budget is in staffing and benefits. So that's where we need to focus. So we're looking at staffing guidelines and looking at how to propose equitable staffing across the district and making sure that we have the data to make wise recommendations and decisions going forward into next year. And we have started the development of the compensation plan by moving forward with information to TASB, so they're helping us work on that right now.
Amy, can you go back real quick on the staffing piece? And I know you touched on this last time, but I know currently, for example, yourself and Ms. Hickman at the elementary level, you're looking at projections from the demographer.
Yes, sir.
And current staffing versus next year's projections to anticipate needed staffing at the elementary levels. And I believe some of that conversation is occurring at the intermediate
Yes.
currently, correct? And then cardonics, we will utilize that to kind of run our request and our current staffing, and we're building that system to be able to run that to get an idea of how or what adjustments we may need to make to current staffing in preparation for next year in our growth projections.
Yes, sir.
Correct?
So that
Okay.
data has gone to Cardonics, and they are working on it. The projected schedules, what students have enrolled in. They look at how many sections we need as opposed to how many sections we have available with teaching staff and can produce some recommendations that way. So we're in the middle of that process right now.
So if, let's suppose that third grade at X elementary school, next year's projections require one less teacher than we currently have staff there. So what's occurring right now as far as if there's a vacancy or a resignation at that particular campus?
Right. That information is going to Ms. Hickman and HR Services, and she's monitoring that. We visited with each elementary principal at this point, so they know what their target is. So we're monitoring it to see if those campuses that, based on projected enrollments, have a decrease, that's occurring with resignations, and if not, and then those have an add for those that don't, so we can make those adjustments internally. So.
Thank you.
So as mentioned, we're monitoring the current year we're in, 20 and 21, and we do that on revenue and expenditures. So this is kind of an update. This is a very unique year because we're under that hold harmless, which fortunately they did grant that hold harmless provision for the entire school year if we meet the criteria. I'm very confident that College Station ISD will. So just as an overview, we budgeted $13,279 in average daily attendance. Right now, if I had to look at actual attendance, virtual and face-to-face, I feel like we're probably going to end in around 12,775 to 13, somewhere in that range, or 12,800. That's where I think we'll end up. But our hold harmless is going to be 13,275. So you can see our hold harmless is very close to what we budgeted. And a lot of that is because the hold harmless factored in what our growth has been averaging for 3 years, and they allowed that. So where you see the difference is in the weighted average daily attendance, and that's how we get our funding. So we budgeted 16,765. I think we would come in just shy of 16,000, relying on our current enrollment and how things are progressing. But our hold harmless was 16,604. So we're not going to come near that budgeted weighted average daily attendance. So that's what's really affecting our revenue. Property value growth, we budgeted 1.5%. It actually came in at 1.9 by the time certified values came in at the end of July. So then going down to see how that affects our revenue, we're going to be right on budget with our property taxes. If you look at interest earnings, we budgeted around where we had for 2019. Interest rates were low in 2019, but they even fell lower in the summer, and who would have known they would fall even more from there and stay there. So we are not going to come near making our interest earnings budget. So not a big surprise there. Some of the other revenues that we're not going to come quite to is co-curricular, other curricular, and our federal, and a lot of that is COVID related. It has to do with attendance, the special events that we have, and those kinds of things, the athletic things that couldn't have the participation or the audience that we've had before. So a lot of that's COVID related. We expect that to come back in future years. And then we have our state revenue that's based on that weighted average daily attendance. And we are expected to, we've gotten the estimates, we haven't received the funds, get about $965,000 in prior year adjustments to our state revenue. If you'll recall, last year and the year before, College Station ISD had some pretty large property tax refunds due to judgments. And I said it will take a while, but we will get that back in the way of state revenue property value audits. And so we should be getting $964,000. I highlight that because that's really helping us out this year, but it's not something we can rely on in the future years when we start looking at 21, 22. And then you get down to recapture. Based on the hold harmless, the fact that we're going to be below our weighted average daily attendance that we budgeted, and our property values came in higher than expected, we are now estimated to have recapture of about $758,000 that we didn't originally plan for. So when you add all of that together, you compare where I think we're going to end up in August 31, we'll be about $985,000 short of making our budgeted revenues compared to what we did originally. So now let's move forward to 21-22. And I know you're accustomed to getting multiple years, but I didn't do that at this point. Yes, sir.
Can you go back to the previous slide? So this is revenue projection.
Revenue only.
And I know you're going to say this later, but I feel the need to say it now. So what you're showing, the estimated final, is that our projected revenue will come in about $1 million shy as to what we projected.
Yes, sir.
Now, but this has nothing to do with, and we'll see this next month, as far as our appropriations. So our appropriations will be different than we projected as well. And so it would be incorrect to assume that, oh, we have $1 million less revenue and we adopted a deficit of 2.7, that all of a sudden it's 3.7 because we have less revenue.
If our expenditures come in right at budget, that's about where you would be. That would be it. I do think that with the help of the prior purchase agreements and a few things that will come in a little better, but you're looking somewhere in that range, 2.7 to 3.5, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Does the revenue include any of the stimulus money that was earmarked?
No, it does not. Stimulus monies is accounted for separately in another fund. So if you'll recall, last year we did move some expenditures out. And so that has to be recorded separately in a different, like a grant or a special revenue fund. So that is not in here.
But that will assist on the appropriation side.
It will, because you had some federal programs on the appropriation side, particularly the prior purchase agreement funds that we were able to go back and apply to anything that we had purchased and received prior to a certain date. And so we have not received those. So we want to make sure how much that's going to be before we make any adjustments on the expenditure side. So as mentioned, because of the uncertainty of our funding formula for next biennium, I didn't do any projections beyond where we are right now. Instead, I'm looking at different scenarios for 21-22. I think that makes a little more sense until we get a funding formula that's secure. So looking at two different scenarios, I'm going to go to scenario 2, first of all, because I think these are numbers that you have seen somewhat, and that's based on what the demographer came in December and showed us, that it feels like we're going to have some pretty substantial growth because of our low enrollment this past year. So 3.9% is the enrollment growth, and so I just factored that same percentage on average daily attendance. So if that would come in, we would have about 13,275 in average daily attendance, and then I did some increases in special education, career and technology, those type things that get the weight, so 17,409. At this point, I'm not projecting any property value growth. I do think we will have some, but we'll know more by around May 1st. I don't think it's going to be real high, but it should be. We should have some growth, but it's not going to make a whole lot of difference in our revenue at this point. So in May, we'll adjust that based on information we get from preliminary values. So then we stepped back a little bit and said 3.9 might be a little aggressive. We might not want to start there. So I used 2.5%, again, with that zero property value growth. So in that case, it will be close to 13,001 average daily attendance and 17,193, somewhere thereabout, for weighted average daily attendance. Based on the state's values that they put out and the property value growth here, it would not project out any tax compression. So our maintenance and operations rate would remain the same under these scenarios that we currently have.
What is the property value growth threshold to initiate compression?
2.5%.
2.5%, okay.
So anything above 2.5%, we could have tax compression. So now everything from here on out is kind of like a crystal ball. Can't put a whole lot of reliability to it. So again, I had to use House Bill 3 because that's all we have right now. And so what I've done here is I've shown you your 2021 budget and estimated final, but my scenarios are going to compare it to 2021's budget because that's where we're moving from. That's what we thought we would get. Property taxes, again, with no growth, same tax rate, should be relatively the same. We're using that lower interest earnings because we haven't seen any sign of any increase for next year. Co-curricular and other, we might be able to adjust that as we know a little bit more, but kind of scaled that back from budget. And we have state revenue and our federal. With both of these scenarios with no property value growth, we're not estimated to have any recapture. So if you look to that bottom line at 2.5% growth, we would end up with about $867,000 of additional revenue over what we budgeted last year. And if we could get that 3.9%, almost $2.6 million. So I know that looks really impressive, but you got to keep in mind we had a $2.7 million deficit. So we're at 3.9% growth. We're just kind of getting back to a break even without any additions.
The federal revenue, that's SHAR's reimbursement?
Most of it's SHAR, some of it's indirect cost from some of your federal programs, but most of it is SHAR's. So now you might ask, how do the ESSER funds affect the 21-22 budget? And again, this is a huge, huge unknown. So we
Amy, you may just say what the ESSER funds are.
Okay, ESSER funds are the stimulus funds that have been awarded through the federal government. It passed through the state government to come to public ed, although there's many other uses as well. So there's three packages out there right now. We had the first one that we received last year, but if you'll recall, they also offset revenue. That's how they funded from spring break on whenever we didn't have students, but they basically held us harmless to that. That's how the state funded it. So passed in through 1.3 million, but they basically took a reduction in state aid for that as well. So we have 2 more rounds that have been issued since then, but we have still not heard how they're going to allocate that to K through 12 public ed. If they will have a state offset like they did with the first round, which is highly likely since we had some hold harmless for the spring semester as well. And we don't know when we're going to get this notice. It would be really nice if we could get it, before summer school started, so I could tell staff if, how much money we have exactly for summer school and how much that will help our current budget. But those are the really pending questions before I could answer how it might help us out for really the current year we're in, as well as 21-22. So we're still waiting on that. The term for spending for both of these last 2 would be March 13th, 2020. So I could go back and recapture some things that we didn't do with the first round through September 30, 2022. So we could plan these funds out for a period of 2 years at least.
So this is ESSER funds 2 and 3.
2 and 3 are the ones we're waiting on.
Received 1, and that supplanted what we were projected to receive from the state anyway. So with ESSER 2 and 3 funds out there, because there's been lots of talk about the federal relief and how right now the state of Texas is holding that and it hadn't been distributed to K through 12 schools. So we don't know how that will be distributed, what strings may be attached, how much might be distributed. There's been some early projections by district as to what that number is. But really, quite frankly, nobody really knows until the interpretation of how the funds are released. Do they supplement? Do they supplant? How they come through the system from the state to school districts. Depending on how those flow through, depends on what type of impact they have on our budget projections.
Yes.
Okay. And I know we looked at something just earlier today. Is it mid-May or the first part of May that the state has submit the necessary requirements of the federal government as to how they might administer the funds? I don't remember. It was the first part of May. So you and I were trying to anticipate a timeline as to when we might find something out.
The last date that we saw in something said May 17th.
17th. Okay, I couldn't remember.
So this is one of those things that's so very difficult for me not to have an emotional reaction to this. I keep getting the emails from TASB, and it's like $8 billion, right, that Texas has been allocated, and they haven't figured out how they're going to or if they're going to give it to the school. So this is one of those times when I have not written my letters yet to our representatives, but this is one of those times that I feel like we need to start speaking up, as school board members and community members, to remind them that they need to figure this out, and sooner rather than later.
Yes.
So again, I haven't figured out how, because I have such an emotional reaction to this.
And some of you may recall that with the first package, CARES Act 1, we did hold some of those funds for this year. We could have, offset everything, but not knowing what this year was going to look like, 21-22, kind of felt like we might need those to help us out, and it has helped us. So we did hold some of those funds and carried them over into this year.
I have to agree with what Ms. Nolan's saying over there, that I think the money, there have been real expenses that we've had in the district because of coronavirus, and that's what the money was set aside for. So I just certainly believe everybody needs to understand that, and the money needs to go to our schools. So along with that, I actually did write a letter today, one. So, but But is this 100% our legislature's decision? I mean, I saw that the bill that the House has submitted had it in there that, the money would go to the schools. Is that all the legislature's decision, or is it TEA involved at all? Who decides?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a combination of all of those. I know some of the delay has been the interpretation of the maintenance of effort and does it apply to higher ed? And I think now they said it did. And so some of the holdup has been just some clarification. But that's a good question as to who makes that final decision. I would think it's going to be, an effort of all of them combined, but I can't be certain.
Write the letters.
Yeah. So budget timeline. So here we're at April 20th. I wish I had more information to provide you at this point from next year's budget. Next time in May, I'll be sharing more about our current year appropriations as compared to the budget, the revenue projections that I gave you, and any update that we may have, what direction we think the legislature might be going with state funding, because that's middle of May. They would only have about 2 more weeks after that. So that's coming up at the May board meeting or the workshop. And this timeline leads us all the way to the public hearing on August 17th, where we would adopt the budget. So, any questions or comments?
So Amy, until we start projecting appropriations, that's when it's going to become more real. Like revenues are what revenues are. We don't control the revenues. Property value, ADA, whatever the case may be, those are going to be what they are. There's nothing that we as a district or the board can do along the lines to influence revenue. Where we have to start looking is at our next update in May is our current year appropriations, your projected end of year appropriations, because that kind of establishes the baseline for us in relation to the projected revenues that she just provided us. So that is where I think our work begins, is on the appropriation side and the cost.
Yes, sir.
I know this is extremely early in the process, but how are you feeling about projected expenses?
For the current year?
No, we had projected revenue.
Right.
We have projected expenses for 21, 22.
Some of that's going to depend on ESSER funds. And we talked about the expenses that we've incurred in the past because of the pandemic. I think some of those expenses are going to continue. We see that with summer school planning and numbers that College Station ISD has not seen before. And so, we need to look at that. At this point, looking at staffing, even with the enrollment growth, we're not having what I would say an enormous amount of additions at this point. We will have some staffing additions. That's why we're spending so much time on staffing right now, that's the biggest piece of our budget. So if we can manage that correctly, and then we need the compensation plan, which we should get some drafts from that pretty soon.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Do you know when we think you'll present to us in all those dates your rough preliminary expenses?
Yeah, I don't have that at this
Maybe
point
June,
for next year.
July?
Yeah, June,
Okay.
yeah. I
Thank
think
you.
if you said when, I just don't have a number.
No,
I would
no.
say June.
June, just rough. Thank you.
I think go back a slide or two, if you will, to the ESSER funds. I think something that all school districts need to keep in mind is the time frame established for those relief funds. They have to be spent by September 30, 2022. So as school districts have to be real careful, whatever funds flow through, it's how you spend those. Are they a one-time expense? Are they a reoccurring cost? And if they're a reoccurring cost, then after September 30 of 22, you're going to have to account for those in your general fund. So we have to be wise in how whatever funds are allocated through, if any, on how we manage those. You can't take, if you get X millions of dollars, you can pour it into staffing if you so choose, understanding that you're going to have to account for that X millions of dollars in a couple of years in your general fund when those federal funds go away, if that all makes sense. So we're going to have to be smart about that. And Amy alluded to it in your answering your question, Thomas. I think that we'll see less staffing ads than we have historically, just because our enrollment, we can grow. We lost folks, and through the course of time and opening buildings, there was always a fairly significant component of the budget of new staffing ads because we were opening new schools and those types of things. And so that always played a significant role in our appropriations projections, because we had to account for X number of new positions because we just opened River Bend, for example, or that's the most recent. We're not opening a new campus this next year or the year after. So some of those, so the amount of money we spend on new positions should reflect that adjustment.
I'm going to go back to this one slide because I think it helps on the staffing. So you're thinking we're growing, the demographer says 3.9%, but we're not talking about a lot of new staff. But look at that, the 3.9 just kind of gets us back up to what we budgeted for 2021. So, we're getting back to that level. And it's taken all of the staff we had this year for what the teachers went through. So it's not that we're overstaffed, but that
I wasn't suggesting that.
I'm just saying
a
that
numbers
that's,
person, and I was just,
Yeah.
we see revenue, but I want to see expense, yeah.
but I
we'll
think
see it
that
in June.
says,
But we'll see it in June.
many would say 3.9%, you're going to be adding a lot of staff. But because of this year of decline, 3.9 is just getting us, it's
kinda
really accounting
resetting
for
the
what we
bar.
went down last year plus some growth, so.
And actually, being staffed for that going into this year, and we made some adjustments even after the year started just because of the workload our teachers were experiencing. So anyway, and it's a legislative year on top of that.
On top of a lot of stuff this year.
Yes.
Snowstorms, ice storms, hailstorms,
Pandemics.
all of that. Okay.
Yeah, we are glad that you're aiming at this very fast-moving target. This time of year is always interesting. Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much, Ms. Strauss.
You're
Are you going to
welcome.
stay up there for a second?
I'm gonna
I
stay
thought
up
you
here.
might. Okay, it takes us to D4. Consideration, discussion, possible action related to the progress of the 2021 Bond Planning Committee. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent and board members. I know that several of you are a part of the Bond Planning Committee, but Ms. Strauss is here this evening just to give the entire group just a quick overview as to the conversations that we've had 2 meetings thus far, and just the timeline, and again, a quick update, much like we did with the strategic plan for those that are not on that committee. So, Ms. Strauss?
Thank you. So first, as a reminder, our committee is made up of 3 Board of Trustees, 2 campus principals, 4 teachers, 2 community members, and 11 parents who are really also community members. And I have to say, I've been very pleased with the turnout. I think we've maybe only had a couple absent each time, and for good reason. So I've been very pleased with the turnout. It's been very good. So our first meeting was on March 30th. That meeting was spent on going over with the committee what their charge was, what the process was going to be. They heard a lot about school finance and how it affects College Station ISD and our debt, and they heard about our enrollment data. So that was all just background information. So meeting 2, as the VLK architect says, you're going to start feeling like you're drinking from a fire hose. So we started with project review. So basically we take the things that we have talked about as priorities and we put them into project packages. And we had presentations on safety and security, deferred maintenance, CTE, fine arts and athletics on the April 13th meeting. That was meeting 2.
Quick question, these are facilitated by an outside entity?
Yes, we have VLK Architect helping us facilitate the meetings.
Thank you.
A lot of it's information that we're doing, but they're helping us get it
Right,
together.
right.
Meeting 3 will be next week on April 27th, when they'll hear about technology, transportation, and land. Our financial advisor will also be here to go over our debt and projections with them and make sure that they understand that. And VLK will start talking to them about project cost. The committee hasn't heard numbers yet. We didn't want to get them bogged down in, the cost of things and start, planning already before they have heard it all. So they haven't heard estimated cost for the projects yet. So then meeting 4 will be on May 4th, where they'll start finalizing their recommendations, and if they want to bring one forward to you as trustees, kind of building that bond package. If we need a 5th meeting, that will be scheduled for May 25th, if we need one more meeting to finalize anything. Some of that might be after we even talk to you as a board at the May board meeting. You may have some things you want us to take back to. So we have one tentative one for May 25th on the calendar.
And Geraldine, just for clarification on your question, VLK is facilitating the process, but like the project review, like safety, security, deferred maintenance, Mr. Hall shares with the group. And then for CTE, Mr. Ross, Fine Arts, Mr. Eek. So our people are reviewing the items with the group.
So the project priorities, I think you've seen these before, but it was explained to the committee that we have predetermined 4 different rankings. One, the highest ranking, administration has identified that particular project as an immediate instructional or maintenance facility need, or one that's needed within the next 3 years. Okay? Because you can't do all this in one summer, so within the 3 years. A priority 2 is a need for the same reasons as 1, but 3 to 5 years out. And some of these can move up on the list. If that HVAC unit goes out, then of course it moves up. But we do have a long-range study that kind of looks at when we need to look at those. 3 is a potential need for all of those same reasons, but more than 5 years out. And then 4 is something that would be nice to have, or the district has had some discussion about this item for possible in the future for College Station ISD. So that's the priority ranking that our committee has been given on the various projects. And many of the projects, even though they haven't seen costs, they've kind of seen what ranking that we're assigning to them as we discussed them. And then our timeline, like I said, we're at next meeting is April 27th. And then the 4th, we will bring you another update on May 18th. 25th is a 5th meeting if needed. And then June 15th would be presenting the final recommendations to the Board of Trustees, giving you time to think about it. And July 20th, if the desire of the committee and the board is to call an election, we could do it there. If for any reason you're not ready, the deadline is like April 16th, which is a day prior to our regular August meeting, which is why we're shooting for July.
August 16th.
August, yeah. August 16th, our regular one's August 17th. Any questions or comments?
Could you go back to the slide that shows the project review? So of the different topics, right, the safety and security and deferred maintenance, CTE, who has provided input into what projects are being reviewed?
Okay, so each of these has a cabinet administration. We've gone over them. A lot of these things, the deferred maintenance, safety and security, we have the safety and security audit. Some of them come from that. The deferred maintenance is from that facilities review that VLK actually did. It comes from 2019, but it's been updated by our maintenance department as they have fixed things or progressed through the last bond.
Okay.
And they've added some things on it because of the number of repairs. So there is a facility assessment that goes along with that deferred maintenance piece, which is, of course is the largest piece here.
Right.
And CTE, again, some of that is just, based on programs. Some of it even is in the deferred maintenance as well, facility needs there.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does.
And also, I'm sorry to interrupt,
That's
but
okay.
there is some overlap in some of the project reviews as well, where some of the deferred maintenance or safety and security, it might have something to do with CTE. In fact, it does. Some of those projects do overlap. So I'm sure that there was a team effort there.
Yeah. But the various directors, fine arts, CTE, they all presented to cabinet administration as well and vetting through this and looking at priorities before we went to the architects.
For the board members that are sitting on the committee, has anything been a surprise or pretty expected? I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
You want me to go? Okay, sure. I don't know if it's been a surprise. There were certain things I think that you know that are needs, that we know are needs, and that and of course they've been brought up. There are. It's interesting to see because every time there's a presentation, you can tell there's a lot of excitement or, oh my gosh, yes, we need this. But in the back of your mind, there's some numbers that start adding up. And some of those numbers can be kind of scary. And it's frustrating because you want the best for the district, for the kids, for the community. And there's so much need. I guess that's the surprising thing, I guess, to me is as it starts adding up, you're like, gosh, I wish we could do this and this and this and this. But you also know it's not possible. I don't think there's been any project that's been this, oh my gosh, we haven't thought of that. But the discussion's been very good. It's been very, very good. And as odd as it sounds, I mean, the first meeting, I really enjoyed having served on the bond committee back, 6-7 years ago. People just don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And the review that was done there was so informative, especially when it comes to school finance. It was so informative, and you could see a lot of people kind of sitting back and, oh, that's why we haven't done that. And so it's been very good, though. I'm sure Mr. Hall has much more profound things to add, though.
No, you did quite well. But I guess want to say, I was trying to read into your question, but the district is presenting what they have identified, but it's being facilitated by VOK, which is outside facilitator. But community members are encouraged, if they think there's an idea that hasn't been addressed at the end of it, that they can submit that. And it's a committee effort to bring it to the board. It's not a district, you're going to do it this way and the committee rubber stamp it. It's a good facilitation. A lot of good conversation amongst the teachers and parents and community members, because we're each sat at a different table. Unfortunately, I don't have any principals at my table, but I think it's been a really good discussion, and I think it's been very eye-opening, as Mr. Nugent said, to the community members and parents realizing how school finance works. I mean, we spent the whole 2 hours, the first meeting, basically on school finance and what we could and couldn't do with bonds.
Okay.
And then example, like with athletics, the new rules with athletics, if they were to do, we could end up, if the committee approved some athletic bonds, we could end up with 3 bonds out of just athletics, 3 different referendums. So it's been an engaging process. I hope we're done by the 4th, but I think that's optimistic.
No, that helps. I thanks for the clarification on who's bringing forth the recommendations and then the community input, because I think that I'm just curious. I was curious how that was kind of interwoven. So I appreciate it.
I unfortunately missed the last meeting because of a death in the family, but one of the things that jumped out to me was some comments made by a couple of the committee members in regard to the fact that this bond, if there is one, potentially would be different than what you think of usually when you think of a bond, which is we need to build a school, we need to build this or that. And a couple of the committee members made comments in regard to how, especially with the change in the bond rules as far as, this is going to be a tax increase, which has to be included on the vote, and some other things, and the athletics having to be separated out, so forth and so on, that how that maybe there should be some concern of if this is solely a bond for, let's just say, for deferred maintenance and transportation, how that's going to, again, play to the public, and I use the word play in the sense of how it looks. Is there going to be a chance that it's not successful because there's not building a school, something of that nature? And so, anyway, I thought that was something for the committee to think about, something for the board to think about if we get to that point, that this is, and I think Mr. Martindale's maybe mentioned it before too, that this is a little bit different than how most people think of traditionally when we've had bonds.
I think something we'll add insight is when it says defer maintenance and you have a general referendum, under that, whatever the committee would decide is where you're capturing a lot of renovations. So then you're going to be identifying campuses that receive renovations. And for example, Mr. Nugent mentioned some overlap. Well, some of those renovations include the CTE area, the fine arts areas. So I think those specifics would be things that we have to draw out and make sure. Again, if the committee decides to recommend something to the board to consider, I think those are the types of things that we have to draw out so the community can see, hey, this is deferred maintenance. Okay, nobody gets excited about deferred maintenance. But when you're talking about renovations to some of our older buildings and it will impact the CTE wing and our fine arts wing, that's a different conversation. So it will just be important that we communicate clearly and in a manner that people understand what they would be getting in return for considering it, if that, again, is where the committee and the board ultimately lands.
In fairness, a lot of the deferred maintenance projects, they're a lot more exciting than it sounds. It's a lot more exciting than, chipped tile and a new coat of paint. I mean, there's some great things in there that I think could build some excitement.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I think you have to also remember that in the last bond, there was deferred maintenance in it as well. It just kind of got overshadowed by the new buildings that you were there. So people have to remember this is an ongoing thing. And when you have to, that school building gets older and carpet's worn out and all of that, it's just how much more expensive that is than, a smaller building. But it was in the last bond. There was several of our campuses that reaped the benefits of that and got renovations and upgrades, much needed ones. And so this is a little different, that you don't have that flashy new building out there to kind of people to drive by and see. So I think that's one of the major differences. So we need to point out that it's been ongoing and we've had them in bonds in the past.
What I'll say, I probed the teacher at my table what he was most interested in or most concerned about, and he was very happy to see the safety and security aspects coming. So, I mean, from a teacher standpoint, that could be very attractive. Some of the changes that could possibly be made if so recommended by the committee.
And I think not just for the teachers, but the community, I think, will like to see the safety and security measures as well, so.
What about the CTE review? I'm just curious because, as you said, sometimes the deferred maintenance or that kind of maybe could get lost in the luster. Has there been discussion on, is the CTE around expanding it, enhancing it? What can you share about that?
We're trying not to talk too much about that. No, I'm kidding. I just see him back there.
We can have him.
No, it was an outstanding present. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want?
That's okay.
No, no.
Go ahead.
put-
I think it's both. I think some of the deferred maintenance is because of current growth in the programs and trying to keep up with the number of students that are taking those or interested in it. And there's also conversations for those priority 3s and 4s.
Right.
What is the district looking at possibilities? Because we value the opinion of this committee for already kind of shaping out what College Station ISD's future might be. So we aren't containing all conversations to this 1 to 5 year thing. We're talking about what do we envision in the future for
Right.
fine arts or for CTE. So they're included in those conversations.
Okay.
And I mean, if I could just add one thing, and I'll be quiet. I know it's been long, but the presenters were so outstanding and contagious. In whether it was fine arts or CTE, and of course, Mr. Hall was as contagious as he could be talking about deferred maintenance. No, but I mean, no, they were truly all so good, and I mean, there was a lot of excitement and buzz, and so much of that was around the leaders of just the vision of these leaders that they were casting for the community. It was really exciting.
Well, I'll let Mr. Ross correct me if I'm wrong since he's in the back, but we'll just talk about Area 1, but it's looking at A&M Consolidated and doing some updates to make fabrication better, to give them some outdoor space to work and do buildings, and at College Station High School doing some outdoor facilities. So it's to improve the facilities for our current programs. That's priority 1. We won't go into the 2, 3, 4, but priority 1 is some very needed items for our CTE programs.
I think you explained that perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm looking forward to when this gets presented because y'all just teased us.
I know.
I mean, if you can be excited about a bond, I mean, I'm excited to hear what comes out of this. Thanks for the tease.
Yeah, I just think, the reason why I'm asking so many questions about this is that we heard, through the surveys and the feedback, diversified learning experiences, and I think we have a really big opportunity here to, with this bond, to fund some of that, to, include that as part of it. So I'm just curious on the discussions, and I'm definitely anxious to hear the final recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just say thank you for you that are on that committee sharing the details. I really kind of answered all of my questions, especially. It's more than just a presentation from these from the district. It is an opportunity to have discussion about it with the people on the committee. So it sounds like we're moving forward with an important list. So I agree. Looking forward to see it.
Anything else? All right. Well, with that, and thank you, by the way, Ms.
You're
Ross.
very welcome.
You had to carry a lot of this this evening, so thank you very much.
That's okay.
With that, we are adjourned, and we'll return soon.